So in this video we're going to do a guided investigation into the non-dual nature of the sense experience. So there are some prerequisites and cautions that I'm going to run through first before we get into this, which I feel are important. In order to follow along with this and take part in this investigation in your own experience, you'll need to know what direct experience is. Otherwise, it will just become a thought experiment. Keeping attention in the sense experience directly is generally going to require some degree of realisation. If this isn't the case, if we don't have any pre-existing experience with inquiry, meditation, or direct experience, the attention will just be pulled into thought consistently, and it will be nearly impossible to maintain attention in the senses for any period of time. So I would suggest that if you try this and you find that your attention is being consistently pulled into thought, that you're thinking about it, and you have to consistently bring your attention or try and bring your attention back to the senses repeatedly, I would suggest you'd be better off working initially on self-inquiry. I have a playlist called Self-Inquiry, which would be beneficial in this situation. On the other hand, if you do have experience with direct experience, if you know what I mean by direct experience, if you've worked in the senses before, if you know what presence means, really know what that means, then this is when I would extend a caution. Because if we're sincere with this, if we're pragmatic with this, if we really look, if we really investigate this, and your experience is right now that you are a separate object in a three-dimensional external world, then this can get really, really weird. It can become disorienting, destabilizing, it can get frightening. It doesn't have to, but it can. So this is just a caution. If that happens, what you can do is count the breath, bring attention away from the senses by closing the eyes, bring your attention back inside to where you feel like you are, and count the breath. This should stabilise you somewhat, and that option is there if you need it. It's only sensible for me to warn you that if you're sincere, if you do this properly, you will dissolve some of the filters that are creating separation, and there can be some surprising and intense effects in experience when that happens. So with that, I'm just going to describe what we're actually going to do here and the methodology, so to speak, that we're going to use. After I lay this groundwork so that we're clear on what we're doing, we'll get straight into it. So what we're doing here essentially is inquiring into and investigating the nature of the direct and immediate sense experience. As we get more in touch with the senses in a direct an immediate way, as they are inherently here as it is, what can come into focus, so to speak, are the thought functions that are making it look like there is anything separate here. I call these augmentations, and they are basically spatial assumptions that make it so that the experience is an external world out there of many objects being viewed by you, the viewer, the subject, the hearer, the sensor, in the centre of it, moving through it, somehow separate from it. So to be clear, the sense experience, this sensory appearance, isn't going to change because of this investigation. That is as it is, and it's constantly changing anyway. We're not looking to alter our experience or cause a specific experience. And the visual sense as it is inherently will not change, and it certainly won't change to conform with the mind's idea about what we are looking for. Let's be clear on that to start with. What does change at some point in this investigation, and what we lose, so to speak, is the experiential reality of the thought function that is making it look like there is a separate external world out there with multiple independent, discrete objects at a distance from what I am, the separate self in the centre of it. All of what I just described there does not exist inherently in the sense experience. All of that is added to the raw sense information through a mental process I call the augmentation. This augmentation seems like reality as it inherently is until it comes into clarity for what it is, a thought as such. So this augmentation, this mental projection, remains seamless with the sense experience, as if it's completely and deeply intertwined within it and on top of it and through it. That doesn't change, but what does become distinct in experience is that thought function, and it becomes distinct as what it is, which is a thought. When that thought function, that augmentation, is experienced directly for what it is, which is a thought, it loses its power to suggest its own existence as the fundamental reality. And with the loss of the reality of that thought function as being something real, what does become more overt in experience is just the pure senses, or the pure sense, as it inherently is. That non-dual sense is not something that can be described, because it doesn't exist in the world of description, language, and duality. But it can become clear in experience. The strange thing is that the senses exist, you could say, or are there before experience begins, before the experiencer is suggested through its own self-awareness. So what we're talking about here at the ultimate level isn't even an experience. It's too simple, too immediate, and too primary to be called an experience. It's before perception, before the movement of perception, where a subject relates to its experience. That function exists purely as a thought. What we are uncovering here is what of experience, so to speak, what of the senses is not a thought. If what I've just described there and laying the groundwork sounds obscure or complicated or confusing to you, just forget it. I'm just saying this to try and provide a clear direction and attention when we're moving into this exploration. But if it seems complex to you, if it's getting your mind revved up, forget it, and don't bring anything I just said consciously in a thought narrative into the exploration. Enter the exploration completely brand new, completely fresh. So here's the important part and the kind of disclaimer. What we're doing here is we are dismantling our deeply held assumptions about our own existence as a separate self relating from in here to an external world out there. We are potentially going to remove those boundaries completely in this exploration at some point. Keep in mind that at any point during this, if this gets too much, I know this sounds ominous, but if this gets too much, if it gets too weird, if you feel like you can't handle it, you can rebuild that internal world, refortify those boundaries by closing off the senses and coming back to this point that feels like you in here, relating to your external environment. So you can bring back the felt to be real experience of distance, separation, perception, relation, whenever you like, and have that be your safe space. And it's helpful to do this whilst focusing on and counting the breaths. So let's begin. We'll start by, in an authentic way, without looking to change anything about our experience, we're going to honestly look into our experience and see where in that experience it feels like there is the real experience of separation, distance, distinction, boundaries, apartness. So for example, in the visual sense, look around the environment where you currently are. Look at an object. Look at a few objects. Do those objects appear to be distinct with their own solid, three-dimensional, inherent existence, apart from the rest of the sense experience? Do the objects seem to be at a distance from what you feel like you are as the one looking? What about that feels the most real? What about that feels the most solid and inherent? Let's continue moving through this immediate sense experience. Listen to the sound. Does it seem like the sound is being heard from in here, from out there in the environment? Does it seem as though the sound is travelling through space to be perceived by a me, the hearer, in here, in it, apart from it, at a distance? Does it sound like there are separate objects in the environment, creating separate sounds which are distinct and individual? What of that experience feels the most real, feels the most solid? Bring the attention to the sensation, the physical sensation of the body. Does it feel like I am inhabiting a solid physical unit, existing on its own within this external environment? Where does it feel the most solid? Where do I feel like I, the perceiver, am residing within that body? Move your body around, have a look at it, touch the body in various areas. How real does it feel? How solid does it feel? How apart does it feel from the rest of the environment? Now we're going to move through the separate senses. Bring the attention to the visual field. Now switch the attention to the sound, hearing. Does it feel like there was a movement between two things there? Is it clear to you that the visual sense and the hearing sense are separate senses with their own independent value? Move the attention to your body, the sensation. Physically feel the body and then move your attention or hold your attention in the body and the visual sense and the sound. Does it feel to you like those are clearly three distinct, separate senses held together by what you feel like you are residing in this physical experience? So what I've just described are the augmentations. These are a thought function, appearing seeming to be seamless with the sense experience, making it seem as though there is separation here, creating the real experience of boundaries, creating the real experience of a separate subject in here, relating to many objects. Be honest with yourself. How real does that feel to you? How inherent does that feel to you? You can maybe get a sense now for what it might be like. Use your intuition here. What it might be like when those augmentations lose their reality completely. We're working with something more real than our patterns of relation and perception. This gets very real, and it can be surprising. So you don't feel like you're ready for that, you can leave the video here and come back, or get in touch with me and have a chat. But let's move into it. So it might feel like I'm moving through these inquiries quickly. It might be too fast a pace, and you can spend as much time as you want on any one of these pointers as you like. by saving a point in the video and coming back to it at some point when you're ready to move on. There's going to be a lot of information, and all of the information I give here is pointing to and describing merely the augmentation, merely the thought projection or overlay that is creating the suggestion of separation, that is segmenting up non-dual infinity into parts. So first we're going to release the boundaries between the apparent separate senses. Bring your attention to the sound. Close your eyes. Focus on the hearing. Focus on the sound. Is there a mental map in your head which might be subtle in thought that is creating a position of me, the hearer, here, and an image of the external world of sounds out there? This image might have an appearance of your body, your face, your head, your ears, distance between you and what's making the sound out there, a subtle image of what's making the sound out there as an object, as something I can recognize as something I know, so that I can know what's going on, recognize where that sound is coming from, what's making it, and how I relate to that as the subject. All of that may appear as a very vague and subtle, maybe poorly defined, or ethereal even, mental map based in three-dimensional space that places objects in my environment, or a vague map of what the environment looks like and where I am in it as the center point. If you're not sure, or this seems vague, or you're aware of something like that but it's not obvious, create that mental map in mind consciously and then relax it. The substance of that mental map, that augmentation, is pure consciousness, pure self-knowing awareness. It's united by its substance. You can relax it all at the same time. It doesn't actually have parts. It's merely one thought, or its substance is thinkingness. It itself is non-dual in nature. It itself is your substance. Simply notice that spatial map, that augmentation. Notice it and release it. As we release, we relax into the pure sound. As we do this, we get closer to the substance of the sound, which is distinct from the substance of thought. If we're in touch with this augmentation, this mental map, then we can become clear on what it is as a thought, not inherent reality. Notice how subtly it's added to or layered on top of the sound. It's following along. It's fabricated its imagination. The sound comes before. The sound is primary to the thought augmentation. It's more immediate, more uncaused, more mysterious. Every time we notice that thought augmentation in experience, we can relax it a little bit, relax its confines of knowingness and objectivity, relax its confines of a view, and dilate out into purely the experience of sound. Now we're going to ask, are there separate sounds? Then turn our attention to just the sound. Notice if there are thoughts appearing with the sound. When a sound, being completely free, being completely impermanent, appears and then seems to disappear, is there a form of following along or relating to that sound with a thought? The thought may mimic or repeat the sound, giving it the sense of appearing across time. But we're going to see that that thought is not the sound, that mimicking reflective quality of the mind is contextualizing something that's so free, trying to capture something that's uncapturable, so transient, so ephemeral, by relating to it through the assumption of time and memory. So lightly and attentively wait for sound to appear. We can't predict the sound, it's too free. As soon as the sound appears, it will be gone. We don't need to relate to that. We don't need to understand it. But what we're looking for is a movement in mind, a movement in thought that's going to take a snapshot, take a picture, and reflect that transient and ephemeral here and gone sound and hold on to it in time for a split second. It may seem as though that sound is the thought and the thought is the sound. Like the only way I can experience a sound is by relating to it from this subjective position of the hearer. But if we pay close attention, we'll see that, or we can see that, the mind is a mimic. Thought is reflecting, mimicking, copying the sound. It's very fast. It's subtly in imagination and memory. There's a lag to it due to the subject-object dichotomy and the seeming distance between these two things that doesn't exist. Again, try not to let my words here rev up your mind. Pause at any minute and come back to the sound. All we're doing is seeing more and more immediately what is sound and what is the thought saying about it. It may appear as a subtle image, a vague appearance, as an object, a vague form as my idea about what made that sound. It will become more elusive, and the more vague, the closer we look. But as that happens, what will become more obvious is the sound itself. And we don't need to relate to it. We don't need to understand it to experience it in its pure non-dual freedom, immediately and completely and clearly. Dilate your attention now out from single objects of sound, single distinct sounds, to encompass the totality of the sound experience. Relax and dilate the attention out as far and as wide as you can, as simply as you can. This is a relaxation. There's no effort in this, but we're simply going to passively become aware of every single sound that is an experience immediately, right now. We do this by relaxing the thought function I just described before, making it look as though there are separate sounds, some being more important than others, as they relate to me, the hearer. Try and observe the definition between this multitude of sound appearance, appearing as one in the moment. Are there any real boundaries between separate sounds in immediacy? Or do I have to use that augmentation again to separate them out? If that's clear to you, notice the effort that's in that. The amount of energy the mind has to burn to continue segregating and separating out and assessing the importance and value of this multitude of sounds in the objective world. Notice the relaxing, freeing quality of allowing the totality of the sound experience to be what you are and move through you and move how it needs to without being known. Take as much time as you need on this. But as we relax out and allow to thin out the definition of the apparent multitude of sounds into one singularity, into one non-dual, homogeneous and alive movement of just sounding, we're going to relax the attention back more towards me, the sense of the one hearing, the subject as the hearing apparatus in the middle of experience. Now we're going to ask, in just the pure and immediate sound, and in only the sound, is there any distance between me, the one hearing the sound, and the sound aware of itself as it appears? In the immediate experience of sound, is there distance? Is there any separation between, or obvious boundary in experience between me, the hearer of sound, the one that is aware of the sound experience, and the pure sound itself? What do I have to add to the already so nature of the sounding that is happening in immediacy? What do I have to add to this to make it seem as though there is a well-defined and obvious hearer of the sound in the middle of all this? Really go to the sound. Is there an inside or an outside, an in here or an out there in the sound itself? Or is that being added through this subject-object thought function? Can I just forget about the hearer and allow the hearer to be replaced by the pure sound? In the immediacy of the sound itself, is there space for a hearer here? What's making it look like there is a one here in the centre of this sound experience apart from it? In part, it might be what we're going to investigate now, which is the physical touch sensation. There appears to be a cluster of sensation here that I take to be in the centre of my experience, where my body resides, that is felt to be the centre point, that is felt to be my base, where I am. And I, in part, use this to reinforce the existence of a separate subject here in a world that's out there of separate sounds. Now we're going to ask, is the sound separate from this physical sensation of a body? Can I hold in awareness, or allow in awareness, the constantly moving and changing and morphing, but also constantly just there experience of the sounding? And the physical sensation, the sense of this body, the sense of touch, the heartbeat, the breath. Take a moment to hold those two seemingly separate aspects of experience, those seemingly separate senses, together in immediacy. And just notice, are there any strong suggestions of a boundary between those two senses? I'm not going to go too in depth into the physical body here, because I found that it can bring up or unearth, so to speak, some emotion, some strong energetic movements. If there's any trauma there stored in the body, so to speak, this can bring it up in a powerful way. So we'll touch on this now. Move our attention to the sensation of the body. I'm going to suggest the physical feeling of the hands, because there's a lot of feeling there, but you can use any part of the body or the whole body, but best to try this with just a body part for now. So with the sensation of the hands, our attention there, we're going to touch a tactile surface, something that is going to make some noise when we move our hands across it. Put all of your attention into enlarging the sensation of the hands as big and as intense as you can. Then bring the hands into contact with that surface. Is this, or as if this is the first time you've ever touched anything in your life. We're going to savour the sensation as much as possible. So we're going to repeatedly rub our hands across this surface, whatever it is. And as we do this, we're going to be aware again of the augmentation. Do this with the eyes closed, but any augmentation that is being projected onto the sense experience, the sensation in the hands, that is providing it with form and dimension, with structure and shape in mind, similar to what we did with the sound. As we continue moving our hands across this surface, there might be a mental image of a picture of a hand, or a mental image of my hand, the shape of it, as a container inside which the sensation resides. Its edges are its limit. The sensation doesn't exist out with the hand. But what we're going to do is we're going to allow the sensation of the hand to bleed out into the sensation of what it is we're touching, such that those two things merge together in a sense, or we relax the boundaries between them, such that what I'm touching is feeling itself from within. What I'm touching is feeling itself, not my hands as a separate thing, feeling what I'm touching. Really go to the sensation and ask, what's happening here? In this sensation, is there a boundary between these two things, these two apparent objects? My hand and the surface that I'm touching. Does that exist in the sensation? This is easier with the eyes closed. Notice how there's no boundary there. Ask yourself, what is the form, what is the shape of that sensation? You can even ask, what is the colour of that sensation? What shape and form am I augmenting onto the raw sense experience through this mind function? And what does that look like? Does it have relativity, size, relative to other things, dimension? Is it bigger than my whole body? Is it smaller than my thumb? What am I adding to this? And can I notice and relax that augmentation further, such that the sensation doesn't need to be captured in form to be understood, such that it becomes completely formless? Can you do this with the whole body sense? Can you extend that up the arm, into the torso, and then forget the designations of arm and torso? Can you bring it into the head, down into the rest of the body? Notice the augmentation, notice the mental map with the structure of form, and then almost have a distinction between that thought function and the actual sensation. Let the sensation spill out of the container we are creating for it with these mental pictures. So as you're moving your hand across this surface, you can do this with a rough surface that makes some sound, and with the roughness you can feel the vibrations through the hand. We're going to turn our attention to and hold simultaneously an experience through relaxation, the sound of that movement, the sound of that contact through the hand, and the sensation of that hand making that contact with the object, with the surface. So the augmentation of hand might be completely gone now. That sensation might be formless. If it's not, if there's still a structure to it, that's okay too. But focus on the sensation, focus on the vibrations that your hand is making and the sound that that's creating. And then feel the vibrations making that sound together, simultaneously and immediately. See if there's a suggestion of a relationship between the vibrations and that sound. Or are the vibrations and the sound one? Is there any distinction or real boundary in pure immediacy between that sensation, the energy of that vibration, and the energy of the sound? Does the awareness of those two things know that they are separate things, that they are two? Do I have to augment time and separation and causality onto this immediate experience, onto this non-dual sense, to make them seem separate, like there are parts to this? Can the sound and the physical sense be one? Was it always one, and that's just becoming clear? What makes it look two? Notice the difference here. Notice how primary the sense is in comparison to what's being added to it to give it context and relatability. So now, are the boundaries between the senses seeming less real? Is our experience starting to reflect the absence of these boundaries, the absence of any distinction between separate senses, or any distinction between separate parts appearing as objects within those senses? What's more real? What's more free? What's more alive? What's more mysterious? The direct sense, or the knowing of it? What's known about it? What the mind's saying about what it is and where it is? Whilst we may have got deeply in touch with this knowingness, this self-conscious awareness, with a shift in identity, we're now leaving that behind as the primary reality, as the background behind all experience. And we're going directly into the dimensionless and formless mystery of just the sense experience. Let's continue deconstructing the boundaries that separate this up, with which we use to know the world from this separate subjective position. What I just described here, with this exercise we're doing with the sensation, you can do and be creative with it in every aspect of experience. Explore it everywhere. Are there distinctions or boundaries between separate senses? Are there any objects within those separate senses? In the sensation, or in any sense, is there a limit to this physical body? And is this physical body apart from the totality of the non-dual sense experience? in just the sense, you won't find any separation, but you'll never be able to describe that. It's uncapturable and unknowable. Relaxing into that mystery of the sense experience, and almost relaxing down behind or through the source of mind, the substance of mind, will lead to the realisation of anatta. What seems to give the world most of its solidity in form and dimension is the visual sense, which we'll move on to now. And this is just a brief, I know it's a long video, but it's a brief guided exploration just to give you a taste of this in your experience. A taste of the direct non-dual mystery of the senses, and once you taste that, take this practice up on your own. Explore this and experience in every aspect as deeply as you like. In seeing, just the seen. In hearing, just the heard. In the felt, just the feeling. In thought, just thinking. When we try and find the thinker, the seer, the hearer, the feeler, we won't find it apart from a thought. So now we're going to bring our attention to the visual sense. So open your eyes, look around. Are you experiencing a world of separate objects out there? Let's dismantle this and see what's actually here. So we'll begin by considering the concept of an object. Let's turn our attention to any object in experience, and we're going to ask, what makes that an object? Why am I experiencing that as its own separate object? So I'm going to use what I've got here. I've got a car. I look at that and I recognise it as car, as a distinct separate object existing on its own, apart from the totality of the background of the visual appearance. It is a real object. It exists on its own. Let's question that. So why do I know that as a car? Because I've learned that. It's conditioning, it's memory. I recognise it as a car based on my past experience. Let's begin by simply noticing that the appearance of that car or that object, it seems to have borders and boundaries. It seems to stop at a certain point, and then behind it is the background that appears all around it. It is appearing apparently on its own, apart from the background, due to perspective. Ask yourself, can I actually experience or see that separate object, that car or whatever it is, completely on its own, apart from the totality of the background? It seems to stick out from the background when I look at it and recognise it as distinct. But no matter how many times I move around it or from what angle I look, I can never see that as anything other than one part of the totality of the background, one part of the totality of the scene. It appears simultaneously with everything else. If I explore the boundaries and edges where that object apparently stops in my experience and then there's something else, as I move my point of focus across those boundaries, does anything about the scene change? Does anything about the visual appearance change at all. In the seeing of it, in the scene, in the awareness of that, is there a difference between the object appearing from the background and the totality of the background? Does awareness in the scene know apartness? Does it know anything other than this singularity, this one non-dual scene? Consider the visual appearance, the scene, as one mega object with no boundaries. One seeing, one scene, one awareness. So it's not possible for me to take that object out of awareness, out of the seeing of it, out of the experience, and experience it independently on its own. It always appears as part of everything in the visual sense. So now we're going to ask, why is that, in my case, a car? Why is that object what it is? It appears as something learned, as a collection of different parts, different smaller objects that make up that one thing. So with the car, it's tires, wheels, headlights, windows, and so on. I'm now going to break this down and consider every part of that its own object. And then I'm going to break those objects down to their components. And I'm going to keep going until I get to the most fundamental component there. The most fundamental component is what's not a component, the seeing, the scene, the awareness. But within that, I can break it down to colours, shapes, shades, light, dark, so on. So we've just got colours. Now, whatever colour we are aware of now, we're going to ask, what is the experience of, in my case, blue? What is that mystery? What can I know of that intimately in direct experience? Allow the colour to take on a vibrant, luminous appearance as it is. Allow this visual appearance to be exactly as it is and appreciate it for its magnificence, its beauty. Recognize the mystery of the experience of colour here. And then dilate the attention, the aperture of experience of the visual sense, the seeing. Dilate that out to encompass a multitude, an infinite number of various, ever-changing appearances of colour and shade and shape. But notice it all appears as what can't be removed from it. The awareness of it. It all appears as the one scene. As we dilate the attention back, we're going to call into question the idea of distance. It might now be a bit more clear what I mean by the augmentation. I mean, it might now be seeing how I am projecting or overlaying this mind-based interpretation of the non-dual visual scene in order to relate to it and know it from this subjective position. The appearance, the visual sense may just have got a little bit or a lot more mysterious and interesting. But now, as we dilate back, we're going to call into question the sense of the one looking. Where am I, the one looking, the looker? Where am I apparently seeing from? Come back and see where do I feel like I am as the one that's looking out into this visual appearance? Do I feel like I'm shooting attention out at an external world from back here somewhere? Is there a relationship, a perceptual dichotomy going on between object, subject, object, subject, me, what I'm looking at, me, what I'm looking at? See if we can notice a delay in that relationship in comparison to what's primary to that, which is just the scene. I'm moving through all of this very quickly, by the way. I've said a number of times now, use this video as much as you like. Pause it at a certain point and work on any specific part of this as long as you need to. So now what we're going to do, so to speak, is to turn the attention, that direction of attention that seems to be looking out from here, back the way towards where I'm looking from. We're calling into question distance here. We're kind of expanding the aperture or dilating the aperture of the beam of attention, the point of focus in the visual field, out from that single point in the centre of it, out towards the peripherals. In that we're going to get a sense of what I feel like I am as the looker that's back here. Now, select a point in the visual field. Repeat what I just described, dilate out from that point to encompass the whole visual field, and then direct the attention, pull the attention, let it fall back to where I feel like I'm looking from as the one in it. In this clear window that I seem to be looking out from onto an external world, is there an inside there? Is there a separation? Is there a window there? Am I looking out of something, a barrier? Or is the visual sense from where I am to what's appearing in it completely hollow, completely clear, and completely empty? We can select an object and then straight back in a linear way, see if there's anything between the appearance, what I'm looking at, and the one here looking at it in the visual sense. From where my eyes apparently are pointing out, and the object I'm looking at, the awareness of that pointing in, from the appearance of that object, trace your way back in a straight line from the object back towards where I feel like I'm looking from. Is there actually distance there between me and that object? The awareness of that object and the object itself. Am I augmenting or assuming that the empty space in between is actually there and I'm actually perceiving that? Or does that just simply not exist in experience whatsoever? How strange is it that we have always assumed that the empty space between things is actually there? whereas it's imperceptible. It doesn't actually exist in experience. So when we look back to try and find myself, where I feel like I am, in the visual sense, even when I'm looking at my physical body, that position of me, that real existence of a subject, can we find that at all? If I am the subject and I'm here, I must be able to find myself apart from the objects of my experience, if I exist in that sense. What we're doing directly here, working in these senses, is we're getting down to the nitty-gritty and we're looking for that sense of the subject, that sense of the separate awareness, the knower, the perceiver. It doesn't exist. It's nothing. Nothing can exist. But paradoxically, you could say it has to be there in order for everything to exist. But in experience, you will never find either one of those two things. And you don't need to, but you can look for it. That's what we're doing here. Finally, whilst maintaining attention in the visual sense, we're going to again turn or expand our awareness out to encompass the sound. We're going to hold those two, apparent two, if they appear that way in experience, these two separate senses and their appearances in awareness. And we're going to have them united by their substance, which is presence or awareness. And we're going to experience presence and awareness as the seen appearing simultaneously with the heard. Expand those augmentations, look for the separation between the seen and the heard. Find the sound without a thought. Find the seen without a thought. Get in touch with the homogeneous cluster or cloud of formless sensation that's appearing nowhere other than where it is, which is here or there or nowhere, doesn't need to be defined. It is what it is and where it is. And it's an unknowable, beautiful mystery. In this non-dual or single non-dual sense, keep looking for the suggestion of separation, of what and when and who, that's contextualizing this all into a model, a three-dimensional, knowable map of experience with me, the knower, in the centre of it. At some point, what will become clear is the very subtle suggestion of there being something inherently here as anything that has a point of view, a stable point of view. That doesn't need to be here in order for this to be what it is, and it isn't here in a real way and never was. But the key is enjoying this sense experience and forgetting about awakening. And whatever practice there is, it's for the sake of itself, not for any goal or attainment. Lose yourself in the beauty of this sense experience, this miracle. So, if you got this far and you're still with me, well done. That probably means that there is some significant clarity where you are. There is some significant realization if you could hold attention all this way through, and if not, it only means that there was significant clarity and realization in the moments that you could, because this isn't an inherent quality or attainment or anything. So well done for making it this far, and I hope you got on okay with the exploration. Please carry this on out with this video, and this can be your new hobby. It was for me. I got so into this and it took over my life, and it's worth it, and it can for you too, because then we're really connecting with what we are that's here, without any agenda, without any dissatisfaction, without any suffering. So thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.